It was a cold, lonely night in the heart of a deep forest. Snow was falling heavily, covering everything in a thick white blanket. The wind howled through the trees, making the branches creak and sway. The only light came from a small cabin tucked away in the woods, where a man sat by the fire. Inside, the cabin was warm and peaceful, with the crackling of the fire as the only sound. The man had chosen this place for peace and solitude. After facing many struggles and hardships in his life, he decided to leave the noise of the world behind. He wanted to heal, to find some quiet and time to think. The cabin was far from the nearest town, a place where he could be alone with his thoughts. Most days, he didn't mind the silence, it gave him a chance to rest and find clarity. But tonight, things felt different. He was sitting by the fire, sipping tea, when he first heard it. A faint cry, almost like a whimper, carried through the air. At first, he thought it was just the wind, or perhaps an animal in the distance. But as the minutes passed, the sound grew louder. The cries were no longer soft, they were desperate, full of pain. Confused and a little worried, the man stood up and walked to the door. He listened carefully, the sound still echoing through the quiet night. His heart started to race. He had heard wild animals in these woods before, but this didn't sound like anything he knew. It sounded like someone or something was in trouble. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his flashlight, opened the door, and stepped out into the cold. The sharp air hit him immediately, his breath visible in the frigid night. The snow crunched under his boots as he walked, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness. He followed the cries, trying to find out who or what needed help in the middle of this harsh winter night. The man's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, his breath visible in the cold night air, as he made his way deeper into the forest. The cries grew louder, more desperate, urging him to move faster. The snow beneath his boots crunched with every step, but the sound of the wolf's suffering was louder still. His heart pounded as he followed the calls. Then, just ahead, he saw it. A wolf. It was lying on the snow, its body frail and trembling. The man's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight. The wolf's fur was matted and dirty, tangled with snow and ice. Its eyes were wide, filled with fear, and it seemed to be struggling to move. One of its legs was bent awkwardly, as though it had been injured in some way, and it couldn't rise. The man stopped in his tracks, a surge of uncertainty rushing through him. Wolves were wild animals, strong and dangerous. He had heard the stories how quickly they could turn aggressive when cornered. He was alone, far from help, in the middle of a storm. The risk was real. Part of him told him to turn back, to leave the wolf to its fate. After all, it was a wild animal. What could he possibly do for it? But as he stood there, frozen, his eyes locked with the wolf's, there was something in its gaze that tugged at his heart. The wolf wasn't showing the anger or hostility he expected. Instead, there was pure vulnerability. It looked at him with pleading eyes, like it was asking for help. Its cries were no longer just sounds of hunger or distress. They were cries of pain, fear, and desperation. The man took a cautious step forward, his mind racing. What if the wolf attacked? What if he made the wrong choice? But as the wolf's eyes followed his every move, something shifted inside the man. He couldn't ignore the animal's suffering. The cries, the look of helplessness. It was clear that the wolf wasn't a threat. It was in need. He hesitated for a moment longer, torn between fear and compassion. Wolves were known to be dangerous, and in its weakened state, the wolf might still lash out in fear. But with each passing second, his resolve weakened. He knew he couldn't just walk away. Slowly, cautiously, the man knelt down, trying to appear non-threatening. He spoke softly, his voice gentle in the cold night. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if the wolf would even understand. The wolf didn't move, but it seemed to relax slightly, its eyes still fixed on him. The man's heart swelled with empathy, and despite the risk, he knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, he reached out, ready to help the injured creature before him, no longer able to ignore its pain. The man's eyes scanned the wolf's body, his heart sinking as he realized the extent of its injuries. The wolf's right paw was caught in what looked like a steel trap. The metal jaws clamped tightly around its leg, causing it to lie helplessly in the snow. The animal had clearly been suffering for days, its fur matted with dirt and blood, its body thin from hunger and exhaustion. The poor creature had nowhere to turn, and if it stayed out here much longer, the freezing cold would claim it. The man swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision that now rested on his shoulders. He had no idea how badly the wolf was hurt. Its eyes, still wide with fear, locked onto his every move, as though waiting to see if he would be a friend or a threat. He could hear its shallow, labored breathing as it lay in the snow, unable to rise or defend itself. He knew what the risks were. Wolves were wild animals, beautiful and majestic, but dangerous. He had seen the documentaries, heard the stories of hunters and hikers attacked by packs of wolves. A wounded animal could be unpredictable, and in its pain, it could lash out. If the wolf attacked him, he would have no way to defend himself out here, alone in the wilderness. But there was something in the animal's eyes that made him hesitate. It wasn't showing aggression, it was showing vulnerability. The man took a deep breath, trying to clear the panic rising in his chest. He could leave the wolf here, let nature take its course. But something stopped him. The cries had echoed in his mind, each one filled with desperation, and he realized he couldn't simply turn his back on it now. He crouched down, speaking softly, trying to calm the wolf. "It's okay," he said in a gentle voice. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf flinched slightly at his approach, but it didn't move, its eyes still locked on him. The man carefully reached out with one hand, trying to avoid startling the animal. Slowly, he touched the wolf's fur, feeling how cold it was beneath his fingertips. The animal trembled slightly, but it didn't pull away. A glimmer of hope rose in the man's chest. Perhaps the wolf wasn't as fearful as he had first thought. Maybe, just maybe, he could help it. But moving the wolf was another matter entirely. The man knew it would be difficult. The animal was heavy, its body limp and weak. He wasn't sure how he would carry it back to the cabin, but he couldn't leave it here. He carefully reached under the wolf's body, supporting its back legs with his hands. The wolf let out a soft whimper, but didn't resist. The man gently tried to lift it, but the wolf's injured paw was still caught in the trap, making it almost impossible to move. The man gritted his teeth, his muscles straining with the effort. "Come on, just a little further," he whispered, trying to sound reassuring. He carefully maneuvered the wolf's body, trying not to make the injury worse. The wolf's body trembled as if it understood what was happening, but still couldn't bring itself to move. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man was able to get the wolf's body to a sitting position. He took a deep breath, sweat beginning to form on his brow despite the cold. With one last push, he lifted the wolf and cradled it in his arms. It was a struggle, but he managed to carry the animal through the deep snow, its head resting heavily against his chest as he trudged back toward the cabin. Every step was a battle against the cold and the weight of the injured wolf in his arms, but finally, after what seemed like hours, they reached the cabin. The man staggered through the door, nearly collapsing with exhaustion. He quickly moved to the floor near the hearth, gently setting the wolf down on the rug. The warmth of the fire immediately started to melt the ice around them. The man moved swiftly, grabbing blankets to cover the wolf, trying to keep it warm while he worked to get the trap off its paw. The wolf trembled, but it was no longer as fearful as before. It seemed to realize that it was safe, at least for the moment. As the man worked, carefully and methodically, the wolf let out a soft whine but didn't pull away. Slowly, the man was able to free the wolf's paw from the trap. He carefully examined the injury, though it was badly swollen and raw. There were no broken bones. It would need time to heal, but at least it wasn't as severe as he had feared. As the man tended to the wolf's wounds, the animal began to relax. It no longer flinched at every movement he made. Slowly, cautiously, it stretched out on the floor, curling into a ball. Its breathing was still shallow, but it wasn't as frantic as before. The man sat down beside the wolf, watching it for a moment. For the first time, the wolf looked up at him, its eyes soft and less filled with fear. There was no aggression, no hostility, just the quiet trust of an animal in need. The man reached out and gently ran his hand over the wolf's head, the fur soft beneath his fingers. For the first time in days, the man felt a small sense of peace settle in his heart. Perhaps, in caring for the wolf, he had found a new purpose. A bond had started to form, one born of compassion, patience, and quiet understanding. The wolf might not have trusted him completely yet, but for now, it was safe. And that, in itself, was a small victory. The next few days in the cabin were a quiet, tender passage of time. The man's attention remained focused on the wolf, carefully tending to its every need. He made a soft bed for the animal beside the hearth, using old blankets and pillows, doing his best to provide comfort. The wolf, though still nervous, began to show signs of improvement as the warmth from the fire and the care he gave helped it recover. The man was cautious at first, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle the wolf. He kept his distance, unsure how much the animal would allow. Yet, every time he approached, the wolf seemed less fearful, its eyes no longer filled with pure terror. Slowly, the man began to offer small bits of food. At first, the wolf would hesitate, then snarl softly in response. But as the days passed, it began to trust the food he gave. It would take small bites, watching him closely, and sometimes even allow him to get closer without recoiling. By the fourth day, the wolf had begun to regain some strength. It was no longer trembling as much, and its once dull fur had a hint of shine to it. The wolf's appetite had grown as well, and it began to seek the man out when it was time for food, stepping closer to him. The connection was still fragile, but it was undeniably growing. The man couldn't help but feel a sense of pride each time the wolf approached him on its own accord, and even more so when the animal allowed him to gently touch its head as it ate. One night, as the fire crackled softly in the cabin's hearth, the wolf did something unexpected. It moved closer to the man, curling up at his feet, just a few inches from where he sat. It was a small gesture, but one that made the man's heart swell with emotion. He had never expected this level of trust from the wild animal. The wolf, once so wary and defensive, was now laying by his side in the warmth of the cabin, content and comfortable in his presence. As the man sat there, gazing into the fire, he found himself speaking aloud to the wolf. It was an odd thing to do, but somehow it felt right. "You know," he said softly, almost to himself, "I've been lonely too." His voice was quiet, but there was a rawness in it, as though the words were being pulled from deep inside him. "I've had my own battles, just like you. Pain, fear. It's not easy to trust anyone when you've been hurt. I get it." The wolf didn't respond, of course, but its warm body resting at his feet seemed like an answer of sorts. In that moment, the man felt a connection deeper than he could have imagined. He had never thought that rescuing a wild animal could heal something inside of him, but as he sat with the wolf, something shifted. The simple act of caring for the animal had opened something within him that had been locked away for years. He had come to this cabin looking for solitude, hoping that time alone would allow him to heal from the pain of his past. He hadn't expected the wolf to play such a pivotal role in that healing. But here, it was this wounded, fearful creature was helping him open his heart again, teaching him what it meant to trust and be vulnerable. The man realized that, just as the wolf had suffered, he too had been carrying wounds, both physical and emotional, for a long time. But now, as he sat there beside the wolf, he felt the weight of those old scars beginning to ease. The connection between them, though still fragile, was undeniable. He wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way he had been when he first arrived at the cabin. The bond with the wolf brought him a sense of peace he hadn't expected, a warmth that went beyond the fire crackling in the hearth. It was a quiet joy, one that filled him from the inside out and helped him feel more whole than he had in years. The wolf, once an animal of the wild, was now a companion, a friend. And though the road ahead would still require patience and care, the man knew this connection would grow stronger. There was healing here, not just for the wolf, but for him too. Together, they were mending old wounds, slowly but surely, side by side. As the days passed, the wolf's condition continued to improve. The swelling in its paw gradually disappeared, and its once dull fur became thick and shiny again, reflecting the soft light of the cabin's hearth. Its eyes, once filled with fear, now sparkled with curiosity and a growing trust in the man who had saved its life. The bond between them grew stronger with every passing day. The man had poured his heart into caring for the wolf, and in turn, the wolf had taught him about patience, vulnerability, and the power of connection. By the time a week had passed, the wolf had regained its strength. It was no longer limping, and its movements were smooth and confident. It had stopped hiding when the man approached, instead choosing to walk beside him, sharing quiet moments by the fire, and even nuzzling his hand in a rare gesture of affection. The man had grown attached to the wolf, and though he was grateful for the animal's companionship, he also knew in his heart that there was something larger at play here. The wolf belonged to the wild, not to him. The man had spent countless nights pondering what was best for the wolf. He had grown fond of it, and the bond they shared was undeniable. But deep down, he knew that keeping the wolf would be selfish. The animal's spirit, its strength, its natural place in the wilderness, it all called out to him. It was free by nature, not meant to be confined. He had helped the wolf heal, but the time had come for the wolf to return to its rightful home, where it could run through the forests, feel the wind against its fur, and live as nature intended. One quiet morning, the man opened the door to the cabin, the cool air of the outside world drifting inside. The wolf, now fully recovered, stood near the threshold, looking out into the snowy expanse. Its body was strong, and its posture regal, the way it should have been from the start. For a moment, the wolf hesitated, its gaze shifting between the man and the wilderness beyond. The man felt a lump in his throat, but he didn't say anything. He knew that there were no words to make this moment easier. The wolf turned its head toward him, its eyes locking with the man's. In that brief look, the man saw everything: the gratitude, the bond, and an unspoken understanding. The wolf had become more than just an animal to him. It had been a companion, a teacher, and a reflection of the man's own journey of healing. But now, the wolf's time with him had come to an end. With one last, meaningful glance, the wolf took a step forward, then another, and slowly disappeared into the snowy landscape. It hesitated just once, as if to make sure the man was watching. And then, with a final graceful leap, it vanished into the wilderness, free once more. The man stood at the door, his heart heavy but filled with peace. Watching the wolf disappear into the forest, he realized that the true measure of love wasn't in keeping something for yourself, but in letting it go when it was time. He had helped the wolf reclaim its life, and in doing so, he had given it the greatest gift he could offer. The wolf had healed him in return, showing him how to let go, how to trust, and how to embrace life with open arms. As the man closed the door and returned to his cabin, a sense of fulfillment washed over him. He had come to this cabin looking for solitude and escape, but what he had found was so much more than he had expected. In saving the wolf, he had discovered a new sense of purpose, and in caring for it, he had healed parts of himself that he hadn't even realized were broken. Later that evening, as the man sat by the fire, he looked out the cabin's window toward the darkening sky. The stars were bright, scattered across the black velvet canvas of the night. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had made a real connection, not just with the wolf, but with the wild itself. The man smiled softly, feeling the warmth of the fire against his skin. In the quiet of the cabin, he could almost hear the echo of the wolf's paws, now free to roam the forest once more. And in his heart, he carried a quiet hope, a belief that kindness and compassion, even for a creature as wild as a wolf, could create bonds that transcend time and space. As the story reaches its end, we are left with a deep sense of satisfaction and warmth. The journey of the man and the wolf is a powerful reminder of the healing power of compassion. Through their connection, both find solace and strength in ways they never expected. The wolf, once lost and injured, is now free and strong again, thanks to the man's care. And the man, who sought solitude in the woods, discovers a new sense of peace, healing the wounds of his own heart. Their bond is a testament to the quiet power of kindness, proving that even in the most uncertain moments, love and compassion can create lasting transformation. In caring for the wolf, the man not only helped an animal in need, but also healed his own spirit. Their story teaches us that sometimes the most profound changes come from reaching out to others, even when it feels difficult. Through small acts of care, we have the power to make a big difference, not just in the lives of others, but in our own lives too. This is a story of healing, of growth, and of the quiet strength found in empathy. It's a beautiful reminder that, in giving, we often receive the most unexpected gifts in return.